Welcome to the Intelligent Business Show, a podcast from Aberdeen discussing the latest trends to keep you and your business at the top of your class. And now, here's your host, Aberdeen's CMO in residence, Matthew Grant.
Hello and welcome to the Intelligent Business Show, the podcast that focuses on the ways that organizations just like yours are using data to make their business more intelligent. I am your host, Matthew Grant, CMO in residence here at Aberdeen. This week, we're speaking with Kathleen Walch, Managing Partner and Principal Analyst at Cognilytica. Cognilytica is a research firm focused on artificial intelligence, machine learning, and cognitive technologies. I invited Kathleen to the show to discuss the state of artificial intelligence, where we are seeing cognitive technologies in use today, and whether we should be concerned about a robot-controlled future. Let's dive in. So, Kathleen, hello, and welcome to the Intelligent Business Show.
Hi, Matt, and thanks for having me on your podcast today.
All right. I really appreciate you agreeing to be on the podcast, since it's really all about the guests. That's the way I look at these things. And so we're talking about, I think at a fairly high level, about artificial intelligence today and cognitive technologies more broadly. And in particular, I was very interested in the schema that you guys at Cognilytica have for the AI-enhanced future. Am I getting that right? Or AI-enabled, I want to say. AI-enhanced.
We call it our AI-enabled vision of the future.
Right. AI-enabled vision of the future. So since we're talking about that future, I wanted to start out with and when I read your piece on that, some things jumped out at me. You know, there are signals all around us of what the future holds, and some companies fail to heed the signals. You talk about Toys R Us, and they go the way of the dinosaurs. So as you put it here, AI is the screaming signal, innovate or die, is what AI is screaming at us right now. I found that a little scary, and so I'm just wondering, I mean, is it really essentially the way you're looking at it, that companies need to adopt and figure out our paths to adoption of cognitive technologies right now, or they're doomed, for lack of a better word?
Well, you know, I mean, at Cognilytica, so we're an AI-focused analyst firm. So we, cover the market. We look at cognitive technologies from a wide lens. And what we've come up with is a 4-part vision for the future. So the AI-enhanced organization, we think that this is just going to be inevitable. So organizations, we always like to ask this question, have you already built a strategy for dealing with this AI-enabled future? Or do you know what it's going to look like? Have you thought about that? So we think that, AI is going to operate, it's going to have significant, advantages for companies that embrace it, and companies that don't embrace it, then they're going to be at a disadvantage.
Right.
So we definitely say, companies need to be looking at this.
Right. So that's a question I had, though, and this goes back to kind of a broader question, and this is part of my own. I feel like I understand enough about AI and machine learning to probably be dangerous, but as soon as I start thinking down a couple of levels, I realize I don't quite understand necessarily what I'm talking or thinking about. So I'm wondering, so for example, one of the things I was reading about on your site was kind of talking about the difference between kind of AI and like a normal application or something like that. And that an AI or artificial intelligence, let's say, becomes, I don't know how to say it, sort of it's a function, or it's something that a system might rely on, but it's not, of course, the whole system you have. I mean, if you have like a AI-enabled chatbot, you have your chatbot application or whatever, it's been set up on your website, but now it's relying on AI services. So I guess what I was wondering was, are organizations essentially going to be relying on AI whether they have a strategy or not, because AI capabilities are going to be increasingly built into the systems that they rely on just to run their businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think that AI technologies are already being built into things, and people just don't realize it.
Right.
So, we always say that that AI is a goal and it's not a technology. It's a compilation of technologies towards this goal of the intelligent machine, where, this machine can operate and function completely like a human. So all of these technologies, all of these AI-enabled technologies are just getting us towards that goal.
Right.
So, a lot of times people don't even realize that, like Apple's new iPhone has facial recognition built into it when it can identify your face. So, that's just starting to become the norm, where 10 years ago, I think people would be like, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. I can unlock a phone with my face. And now it's just normal. So it's just built in. A lot of companies are also moving towards AI-enabled chatbots, where, they're the first line of customer interaction. A lot of restaurants are moving towards that. People are now putting, devices in their home where, 10 years ago, again, people would be like, this is crazy. This is like a microphone, like an Echo or
Right.
a Google Home or Microsoft Cortana. So things are just continuing to change.
Right. So that's, I guess, what I was saying is, there's an inevitability to this. There's obviously not just hype around it, but actual people are finding use cases and actually meeting them with AI. But there is a way, it seems from the innovator die standpoint, perhaps, what organizations, it's not about and whether am I going to have AI or something in my organization, because as we're just saying, you will. It's going to be in stuff that you're using. But I guess what you guys are just more talking about is if one's looking at one's business, even from a sort of digital transformation standpoint, the real challenge is going to be looking at my business or my organization and saying, where can I apply these technologies to gain competitive advantage, increase efficiencies, change even my business model? Am I thinking about this properly?
Yeah, just in general, companies need to be, asking themselves that question. They need to figure it out. What we've found is that right now, a lot of organizations are not nearly as advanced with their AI capabilities as we think they are. So there's some companies that are just, truly innovative. But for the majority of companies, they're just starting to get into this. And that's why it's important that they continue to ask these questions, because what will it be like in 10, 15, 20 years if they're not moving towards artificially intelligent machines, if they're not, bringing their workers up to speed? Because we think that, part of our vision with our AI-enhanced organization is that it's going to have three major impacts. It's going to have an adjustment to the workforce, where either AI technologies are going to, outright replace humans, or they'll move towards this augmented intelligence, where how we define augmented intelligence is that it's augmenting and assisting, but not replacing humans.
Yep.
So that could be a system that, helps you look up, new laws and regulations that come into place, or new accounting laws that just hit the books when you're, filing taxes.
Yep.
So AI also is a disruptive technology. So disruptive technologies always have impacts on the workforce. What we say is that the secretaries of the 1960s are now the database administrators of today. So if you're looking to become a secretary today, there's probably not many jobs. And we're not saying specifically that a secretary is now a database administrator, but the idea of the secretary is gone. And back in the 1960s, the idea of the database administrator didn't even exist. So that's how there's just, it's not a job killer, but it's a job category killer, where it might have killed the rooms of secretaries, but it's technology's created new jobs.
Yeah, though it's interesting too, I think, how that's worked and how it starts to paint a different picture of what an organization will look like. Because in a sense, it's not, to your point, it wasn't the database administrators who replaced the secretaries. In a sense, it was Microsoft Office. And the fact that an executive, for example, can now manage everything from their calendar, their correspondence, even their expense reporting through a series of apps, and they don't necessarily have to do very much even to make it happen, right? And so I think, but the other part that I keep thinking about when I was reading your stuff is like even when you said, 15 to 20 years out, there's a piece of this where you guys are really working on, it's futuristic technology that's so disruptive that it starts to make it almost impossible to me to kind of envision how I'm going to make a prediction about the future. And here's an example because I know, we're going through this in sort of a nonlinear way, but one component, of course, of your 4-part schema is autonomous everything. And you were talking about autonomous vehicles and autonomous systems doing a bunch of things for us. And one of the things you talk about in there is, well, if we get to the point of having autonomous vehicles, then maybe people won't have to own cars anymore. Maybe we'll really have transportation as a service kind of model. And what kind of impacts will that have? Well, one impact will be, forget about taxi drivers and Uber and everything like that. That's going to go away. But more interesting is you mentioned, well, maybe it will mean houses don't have garage anymore. You don't have a driveway anymore. You just don't, and suddenly it got me thinking about well, if the impact of this thing can start even changing how houses work, because that's going to affect how architects work and it's going to affect how contractors work and all these other things, suddenly just this one change, like autonomous vehicles becoming dominant, has so many repercussions that, it's like the proverbial butterfly wing that starts the cyclone. It pretty soon creates a future of so many forking paths and interconnected dependencies that even prediction becomes pointless. Am I just being too pessimistic about this?
No, yes and no. I wanted clarification because I don't actually view this as pessimistic. To us, this is, very futuristic, and there's a lot of positive things that can come from this.
Sure.
So, the idea of not owning cars anymore, how that will change things. Maybe we'll still have garages, but we use them more as loading docks for deliveries instead of actually storing it, using it as car storage.
Mm-hmm.
But if you don't need to drive anymore, then that means that, children who maybe are old enough to go places by themselves but not old enough to drive can now, freely go to a soccer game and you call a car service, they pick them up and they bring them home. And so parents don't need to be shuffling kids back and forth all the time. The elderly are now able to go to doctor's appointments and get out of their house and live more independently than they could if they were relying on cars.
Yeah.
People with disabilities can do that too. If you're blind, you can't drive. And so sometimes living, on your own can be challenging. But with all these new AI-enabled technologies, especially with autonomous vehicles, now they can drive freely to and from work, through the autonomous vehicle and not have to be, driven by other people. So I guess I just have a different perspective on it. I don't view all of that as pessimistic. Yeah, there's always, negatives to technologies, like with any disruptive technology, but I think there's a lot of positive societal benefits.
Oh, yeah. So I'm sorry, because I think I didn't mean to misspeak. What I meant was I definitely see like everything you just mentioned, all the kind of benefits that autonomous vehicles bring to the table, or transportation as a service kind of thing. When I need to get somewhere, I can go there. Now children can, now the blind can, et cetera. Totally. No, what I meant more was it's interesting once you start, once you start thinking through what the implications of some of these changes are. It's what you have to start realizing, or what I was realizing in reading your stuff, was that we can't just project autonomous vehicles into the future and think that we're just going to live in the world we live in now, but with autonomous vehicles. Because that's, even as you're saying, that won't be the case. Because we're going to be living in a world where, for example, people have loading docks instead of garages. So even how housing works, or what makes it even possible to live in certain places where you couldn't live before because traveling or getting stuff to you was challenging. So it's more about what I was pessimistic about was our ability to start predicting or even imagine what the future is going to be like past a certain threshold, because these changes are going to be so systemic that the entire thing will change. not just how we drive, for example. And so, I mean, if that makes sense. So I was just pessimistic about it's like a kind of singularity argument. From a science fiction standpoint, AI is about, there's this motion, well, when are they going to be truly just like us? And in fact, competing with us is the negative thing. But there's this idea, and that's the singularity argument for the last 20 years has been, this is a kind of event that we can't, because it's a singularity, we can't predict what happens on the other side of it because now everything's changed. But so that's what I was pessimistic about. But so coming back to the real world and not Matt's apocalyptic vision of an AI-dominated future. So one of the things that you've talked about is that there's this vision for how things are going to be or could potentially be, and yet sometimes you become then aware of how far away we are from manifesting that. And so I was just curious, like you had said in one of your articles, you guys talk about the hype around AI and how everyone kind of applies now AI to their products. And you said even those products with the thinnest AI capabilities. So I was just curious if you guys have a sort of taxonomy about, what's automation you've already said is not AI. So what's the kind of baby step, thin capabilities to a thick, to a full system? And if you have examples of how those exist in the world, that'd be cool.
Sure. Yeah. So artificial intelligence has been around for 70 plus years. So it's not a new idea, but it's gone in and out of favor. We've had, 2 AI winners, but now we're back in what we're calling an AI summer, where things are really heating up. People are really excited around artificial intelligence and what it can do. And we've also seen that VC funding is really hot around artificial intelligence. So that's where we've started to see, anybody who even remotely thinks they have some AI capability, they'll put it really in marketing, and they'll put a thin veneer. So what we call a thin veneer of AI is like if you have some OCR technology, optical character recognition.
Yep.
That's not really AI. We don't always like to define AI. That's why we say it's more of this goal towards the intelligent machine where it can, all these technologies are AI, because if we're saying, lead us towards that. Because if we start saying, well, this is AI and this isn't AI and this is and this isn't, we're really splitting hairs. And I think that we're not going down the right path. Mm-hmm. But if we are, saying what we think are very thin layers of AI, that would be OCR, or maybe putting a little natural language processing in something so that you can query. These aren't really, really like strong use cases for it. And that's how I think people start to blur the lines. And there's also a lot of marketing hype around what some of these companies are doing. And I think that the marketing is spun that has more AI capabilities and it's more farther along than it actually is.
Right. So are there, you guys, you know the space better than anyone. So are there cases of products or companies where you think the AI capabilities that they've built into their technologies go beyond this kind of early successes of AI like OCR and stuff like that?
Yeah, there's a lot of companies, and it depends on the space. There's some companies that are using artificial intelligence for, they'll use image recognition. And so you can start classifying on websites. Amazon does this, for example. They were, one of the leaders in the space where they just get so many products that they're selling on their site that you can't possibly classify all of this with humans. So they've used artificial intelligence to automatically classify and tag these images so that they can now be on their site. Hyper personalization is another area where we've seen a lot of really good use cases in AI, predictive analytics, conversational interfaces. These are really good, true use use case examples of where companies are using artificial intelligence. Also, autonomous retail. That's another thing that we talked about with our AI-enabled vision of the future as well, where autonomous retail, which one of the most, famous use cases that people would know is Amazon Go.
Yep.
Where you can go in and, it registers you in the store, you go in, you pick up your products, and then you leave. And there's a few other companies that are doing that as well.
Nice. And you also said, going back to this autonomous everything, so you talked about autonomous retail. One of the things you said in the article was, we already see the use of autonomous systems for retail, as you mentioned, healthcare, journalism, and even critical infrastructure management. Could you talk a little bit about how that's happening, this infrastructure management component?
Yes. So there's already, some use cases where bots are helping to monitor bridges.
Okay.
And they can go into areas where, and roads. They can go into areas where it's not always safe for humans to go.
Uh-huh.
We've also seen it with electrical infrastructure. There's been some use cases in the digital mine where, we're mining in areas that are just not safe anymore for humans to go to.
Nice. So the other two pieces of this kind of in the AI-enabled future that you discuss are enhancing human experience and the pervasiveness of knowledge. Could you talk a little bit about how AI, as you see it, is going to help enhance human experience?
Sure. So, in general, we see that AI, when used in an augmented intelligence approach, it can do a lot. It can take, ordinary people with, ordinary creativity and really increase that, make them great musicians, artists, poets. We actually had spoken with a woman who's a YouTube celebrity, and she calls herself a casual musician. But with the use of AI technologies, she was able to write and produce an entire album, which she wouldn't have been able to do on her own. So that's really how we're taking artificial intelligence and really, overall enhancing the human experience. Another thing that it can do is it can be this idea of a universal translator, where humans can, communicate with anybody in any language and be understood. We already are seeing some use cases of this. Google Translate is a good example where you can hold your phone to written text and it will translate it for you so that you can go to different countries and, it's not 100% accurate, but it's pretty good. Facebook also has their translator tool. So, it overall enhances the human experience.
Right.
There is a downside to that, though.
Sure.
That we do, that it starts blurring the line between this human and machine-created experiences.
It's funny, but we even saw that in, when the recording studio, multi-track recording came along, there was a big debate, in the classical music world, whether or not you should use overdubs and cuts and edits to make a perfect recording or whether you should just have it almost be a documentary type thing. And Glenn Gould famously he did edits and people are like, that's cheating. But so I think I see this, like you're talking about, allowing AI to actually enhance someone's artistic ability or do stuff they couldn't. I feel like I definitely see why people would see that as cheating. At the same time, it opens up a whole new medium, really, when you look at it. But I was also thinking, though, even in stuff you were saying before about kind of certain types of personalization, for example, or even especially personalized healthcare and things like that, would itself be an application of AI that would truly enhance the human experience.
Yeah, that's also, another way that it would truly, it can just enhance it in so many ways, right? So we talk about, hyper-personalization, where Starbucks was a really good use case for this. They were able to send out, it was something like they went from maybe 30,000, 300 to 30,000, something like that, unique offers that they were able to send to their customers. And they were only able to do this through the use of AI. So, that's a small use case of how it can overall enhance the human experience, but to get a more targeted, offer, then you can have, your beverage of choice and
Right.
have a nice afternoon tea.
No, actually, it makes things more convenient, but I think people would, in the customer experience world, we continually talk about surprising and delighting your customers. And I think AI, at least, especially as it gets closer and closer to kind of a true intelligence, at least introduces the idea of truly being able to surprise people, especially by anticipating and meeting their needs. I mean, it could be spooky, but I think it could also be rewarding. The final part was this idea of pervasive knowledge, and I wasn't sure I totally understood what you meant by that. So how does this complete the picture of the AI-enabled future?
Sure. So right now, a lot of organizations, they already have knowledge at their fingertips that they've been able to gather throughout the years with everything that we've done. Data's been in the news a lot lately. So the AI-enabled future is going to make knowledge pervasive. So it's about moving from this pervasive connectivity right now that we have because of the internet and mobile phones to this idea of pervasive knowledge. And it will be the assumption that everybody and everything will have knowledge about everyone else. So it means that this assumption will already be that we know exactly where we are, we know what we want, we know where we're going, and that this idea doesn't arrive, solely at pervasive surveillance, although that's part of it, but it's just going to be about, the assumption that you already know where I am and you already know what I like. You already know how I want to be contacted. So don't contact me any other way, and make sure that it's really, targeted for me.
Right. And I think it's funny how you start to even see the layers of AI that will be necessary for this, because it's one thing to know how you and my colleague Ben here and everyone wants to be interacted with. But now I'm going to need a smart manager that's going to help me remember all those things on top of it. It's like the system starts to feed on itself. In order to manage this pervasive knowledge, you're actually going to need intelligent assistants there.
Yeah, and one example that we like to provide is that with this AI-enabled future for pervasive knowledge, since there's an assumption that we already know, where each individual person is, if there's, an emergency like a tornado or a flash flood, you will now be told exactly where to go and what to do and how to handle the situation. Instead of just, getting an alert to my phone saying, oh, there's a flash flood warning in effect, or, oh, there's like tornado sirens. People are going to be like, what's a tornado siren and what's that noise in the background?
Yep.
Where it'll really be specialized and individualized just for you.
Right. And so I can think of that too, just in these big Paradise fires and stuff they had out in California. One of the huge things after that was, how do we find all the people and who's missing and who's met the, or how things turned out badly or who's just lost. There is this element here where this suddenly that doesn't become a question anymore because or there's ways of tracking people. But I also like your idea of kind of individualizing. Yeah, right now, whenever there are flash floods here in Massachusetts, everyone's phone goes off because we've just got it'd be great if someone we're not even in a flood area, it doesn't matter, we wouldn't get it, and the people who were, it's like this is, it'd even plug you right into Google Waze or something like that and saying, here's the fastest escape route for you kind of thing.
Yeah, right. Like here's the fastest or here's the safest way to avoid where this flash flood area is.
Yeah, no, precisely. So, and that's, yeah. So I think we're getting around to the end of this. I know that the issue, I guess I just need reassurance, Kathleen, that this future of pervasive knowledge and everything we're moving into isn't going to be like, I think about facial recognition technologies being used to like squash protests, or even like now China, the social rewards system that they're using kind of to control the population ultimately, or even something like that Tom Cruise movie, Minority Report, where the police, they talk about this already, the predictive analytics around individuals and kind of picking them up before they, commit a crime. So I guess as a final word for me and my listeners, or our listeners, I should say, how can you, what's going to help us feel like the worst case scenarios aren't going to come to pass, and this really will just be an awesome thing that just helps us unfold human potential and infinitely enhances the human experience of living here on Earth?
Yeah. It's funny that you brought up some of those examples, because I just read an article today about how Central Londoners are going to be subjected to facial recognition tests in the coming week with certain train stations, and they're like, oh, but don't worry, if you oppose this and you don't want it, don't worry, the police won't think anything less of you. And it's like, really? Okay, like they're not yeah, because I'm not going to be I don't want to be subject to this facial recognition surveillance. But yeah, right, like, oh, okay, thanks. And in China we're already seeing it where they have their social scoring, and based on, how you behave in public, if you jaywalk, if you commit a crime, then your score is dinged.
Yeah.
Overall, though, the most important thing is that with any technology, there's good and bad use cases.
Sure.
And so we have a response to this with, have an ethical AI approach and make sure there's companies that have ethical boards now, and that's something that we're hoping will become more prevalent in 2019 and beyond, that they're starting to look at all these use cases and say, okay, well, yes, we can use it for this, but we can also use it for this. I mean, every technology that's disruptive is going to have good and bad use cases. I mean, even if you look at the telephone, it's great because you can interact with people and communicate. We can have this podcast, but you also get spam callers and, people that can call you any time of the night or day. And, AI technology is going to be no different. It's going to have good and bad use cases. So we just say take an ethical approach, make sure that, you have oversight committees. Laws will have to catch up with this. And then, there's also, with laws catching up to this, people are going to have to figure out if they want to consent to have their data used for these machine learning training data and letting all these companies have their data, or if there's an opportunity to opt out. GDPR has already started that, but that's mostly, it's mostly a European thing. I say mostly because I think it's trickled to all over the world because of that. But, we just need to make sure that we continue to look forward and make sure that we're looking at all angles of it.
Yeah, no, I definitely like the ethical AI approach. I was also realizing, too, of course, even in what you were saying before, as these technologies become more ubiquitous and built into things, then it's always also going to be possible to use AI to even counteract things that they find particularly invasive or Orwellian, I suppose. So the human ingenuity will out in the end. So, well, Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us today on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much, Matt.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Next week, we'll be talking with Toby Buttorf, VP of Service and Experience Design at EPAM Continuum. You won't want to miss it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Intelligent Business Show. You can find this show on iTunes and Spotify, as well as on YouTube. And be sure to follow us on Twitter at Aberdeen_show. And if you want to know what's going on in your market space, be sure to check out Aberdeen.com.